Say, kids, what time is it?
It's kind of like watching TV, but, in your car.
104.7 The Cave, Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens in the studio. It is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 95, my pick this week, and it was called Keeper of the Ashes, the Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders on Hulu. It was an ABC News documentary that was on Hulu and was released end of May. It features Kristen Chenoweth, who, if you're not familiar, she's an actress, she's a singer.
Broadway musical girl.
Yeah, actually really,
Wicked.
really talented. And she's actually from Oklahoma. And we'll get into her involvement into this later on. But this documentary tells the story of three girls between the ages of 8 and 10 that were sexually assaulted and murdered at a Girl Scout camp in Camp Scott, Mays County, Oklahoma in 1977, that summer. Before we get into this horrendous story, Jay, were you ever a Boy Scout?
I was a Cub Scout briefly.
Cub Scout, like how long?
Probably not too long. 6 months.
Did you do the derby? Did you make the car?
Made the little wooden car. Yeah, made a little wooden car. What else? Made like a fake campfire with like lights and
get your badge and stuff like that.
I had some random badges. It was one of those things, just like too much work for my mom for sure. To
get you at all the meetings and all that stuff. So slowly but surely you got out. Do you think if she had not dipped out, you would have stayed in it?
No.
You were like, stupid.
I think I was peer pressure. All my friends were doing
for all your friends were doing. You're like, I got to do it too. I bet that happens a lot. I went through Boy Scouts, and I actually learned a lot. And probably my love for the outdoors started there, because my parents never went camping. I think we went to a couple times in my life. We went on trips to Gulf Shores, family stuff like that. We went to a cabin or two, but camping and roughing it, that love started with the Boy Scouts. And then in high school, I was friends with guys that were hardcore about it. And that's where all my camping stuff started. I never camped in a tent with my parents. That just all started because of the Boy Scouts. Now, obviously, we're talking about the Girl Scouts here, which
I get their cookies
a little bit different. Oh God. Yeah. What's your favorite?
I will get the Thin Mint.
There's only there's only one right answer.
Put them in the freezer.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah. All day. I like, I'm probably going to get hit for this one, but I like the ones, the caramel and the coconut.
Yeah.
Those are called.
Those are good.
I like those.
Yeah. Those are good.
It's easy it's not easy. It's hard not to drop a hundo on Girl Scout cookies every year when you see them outside of Walmart.
You gotta respect the hustle, man.
Dude, and get enough to last you. Yeah. Oh, and they are hustling. It's actually kind of crazy that you could make the case that it might be a little trafficky on that, using kids to make a lot of money for an organization.
Yeah, right.
But that's not what this documentary is about.
Another episode.
And we will do that investigation at another time. What this documentary is about, like I mentioned, 3 Girl Scouts that lost their lives in the 70s. Now the story is crazy because I guess 2 months before the murder, something had happened at this camp where one of the counselors had noticed that all of her stuff had been ransacked. Some of the stuff inside of a box had been stolen, and inside of that note, in that box, there was a note that said, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls, intent 1."
Yeah.
At the time, the director of the camp was like, this, it's like the late 70s. There's a lot of horror movie stuff. It's a prank. It wasn't a prank. Well, I don't know. Do you think that?
I don't know, man.
That's the thing. They don't really know if that note came from the killer before.
Very mysterious.
But the fact is, he didn't live too far away from where this Girl Scout camp was located. And that's where we'll get into the suspect, his trial, and all the craziness with this documentary. Dark Side of the Stream continues next on 104.7 The Cave. 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 95, discussing Keeper of the Ashes, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, hosted by Kristen Chenoweth on Hulu. Did Hendrix go through Girl Scouts?
No.
She just didn't want to.
She's never done Girl Scouts.
She's more of a theater kid, though. You know what I mean? And that's those thespians. They start early, and that's sticking to it. So that's good. I mean, she's lucky in the sense that she found something that she loves and is super passionate about it. Because kids kind of get lost, especially when they get into the teens and stuff, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. What they end up doing is just picking up this stupid block and staring at it all day.
We got to keep them away from that.
You got to keep them motivated and hopefully help them find something they love and they can be passionate about. So anyway, The crazy thing about this is my dad actually lived in Broken Arrow for a little while in Oklahoma, so I'm pretty familiar with this area. Obviously, this was years and years and years and years later. But the girls that were in this Girl Scout troop were from Broken Arrow, including a Christian Chenoweth, who at the time was 8 years old in the Girl Scouts, was planning on going on this trip, but because she, I guess, became ill, she didn't feel good, they didn't send her. So she could have been one of the victims easily, but didn't go. And that is where her involvement comes into. At Small World, though, man. Have you ever had any close calls where it was like, dude, if I'd been there, I'd have been dead. I'd have been shot.
Man, I don't know. I don't think that bad. No, I don't think anything that's serious.
Nothing where you were like, oh my God, I could have died.
I was probably just oblivious to the fact it could have happened.
And then, years later, you're like, oh my God, that could have been me.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I do know that my mom, or at least my mom, always tells the story that when we were living in Vegas, at the time in the early to mid 80s, there was a lot of killer action stuff going on. There were serial killers that were active in the area. My dad worked a lot. She was at home with me and my newborn brother constantly, and she was scared to death that we were going to be.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. If you look up some of the murders that happened in Vegas, not mob related at the time, but actual like serial killers, there were a lot of active killers in that area, Nevada, just out west in general, including, I guess you could consider this one as well, in the late 70s. So what happens is they basically one morning they find a body inside of a sleeping bag, then they find another one, then they find another one, and so they do the testing. They show that these girls have been assaulted, bludgeoned, then strangled. They end up finding a fingerprint on one of the flashlights that were left there, which they think was probably one of the murder weapons. They also found a footprint of a 9.5 shoe size that was covered in blood in one of the tents. So they know that that was probably the killer. But the thing is that I guess the night that this went down, there was a thunderstorm. And it was just by chance that happened, because that definitely screwed with the evidence the police were looking for, since this happened at outside campground tent, stuff like that. But what they ended up finding out was that there had been this guy that had left or escaped from prison in like 1973 or something, and had been on the run for a long time. And he had been raised about a mile away from where this place was. And that was the suspect from the get-go. We will give Jay some coffee before we return, because he's about to fall asleep on my history lesson, This Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio. It is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 95, discussing Keeper of the Ashes, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. So you're relatively new to this area.
Right.
I know that there is out by James River and the Springfield Lake, for a long time, they always talked about the Girl Scout camp. I don't know if it's still out there, because I haven't been out there in a long time, but for a long time, at least in high school, when we'd go out there and sneak out there and jump off the bridge and do what high school students do, there was like a dilapidated building in the middle of that area, which I think it was just one of those things, like this story kind of traveled, oh my God, a bunch of Girl Scouts got killed out here, blah, 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 blah. And then just became, I don't think that actually happened. I don't even know if it was a Girl Scout, but that's what they used to call it. So when I was watching this documentary, I had the thought that maybe that's what had happened. Like this happened in, not too far away, 2.5, 3 hours. Right. And then, people around here were like, oh, it was here, but no, it wasn't here. It was in Oklahoma. So anyway, there was this guy named Gene Leroy Hart, member of the Cherokee Nation, lived or at least been raised about a mile outside of Camp Scott is what they called it. And in 1973, escaped from jail. And he was on the lam. He'd been convicted of kidnapping and assaulting 2 pregnant women and 4 counts of burglary, escapes from jail. And then about a year, they're like, this might be our guy, because it definitely matches what he was into. They arrest him at the house of a Cherokee medicine man. He was represented by a local Oklahoma attorney, and the trial was set 2 years after this happened, in 77 and 79. The local sheriff, he pronounced himself, at least this guy, that he was 100% guilty, right? This is before DNA existed. They did have that fingerprint, but they couldn't really tie him to that. I don't remember what they said about the footprint, but that's also damning too. And so they go to trial. Guess what happens?
The damn OJ style.
Acquitted.
They quit him.
To me, I don't know how that worked, but they acquitted him. And I feel so bad for the families because they kept fighting this thing years and years and years, because I don't know what it's like to have to deal with something like this as far as closure goes, but I would assume the fight was because, I mean, if you had lost a family member to something like this, and the guy who was, convicted and you knew in your heart, like, dude, what the hell? Where's the justice here? You'd want justice, right?
Terrible.
How hard do you fight it for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
It'd be all consuming. I don't know how the hell you could just walk past it.
It's pretty tough, man.
So after this happens, he gets acquitted. Well, the time he was still, because of the accusations and him being guilty for the other things that happened before this Girl Scout incident, the pregnant women, he had 305 years to 308-year sentence left to serve. So
he ain't going nowhere.
Even though they acquitted him of this, justice was served in the sense that he never saw the light of day.
Right.
Now, I don't know about you, but right after this trial was over, in June of 79, he collapsed and died of a heart attack at the age of 35.
35. Lifting weights in jail.
He's just in the prison yard working out.
And
drops
35
dead.
years old, heart attack.
Is that justice?
That probably was some karma.
But to be given an out like a heart attack and then that's it, as opposed to serving 308 years of your life or whatever, the rest of your life in prison, I don't know if that's justice. Right. To me, that's not me. But what would end up happening is that in the mid to late 80s, when DNA really started to kind of get into the forefront, the family went back and said, "No, what? We're going to fight this thing. We're going to fight it. We're going to make sure that if he was the one, we want the closure." And we'll tell you next if that family got closure or not. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio one more time. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 95, Keeper of the Ashes, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders on Hulu. If you want to watch it, do it. It's kind of a crazy story. I wasn't really familiar with it. As I mentioned, I'd always heard that there was a Girl Scout incident here, but I think it was because of moved here, and that's
freaks you out, man.
Well, yeah, you got kids, but that's crazy. Like, think about how far we've come, or I don't know if it's how far we regressed, but back in the day, like in the 70s, it wasn't a thing to say, "Okay, kids, see you in 2 weeks," and send them off to some camp somewhere.
And they still do that, though. They still got camps going on where they send the kids away for a little bit. And now I'm thinking twice about this stuff. My kid's never done it, but her friends are doing it, and so she's been talking about it.
Going on a camp
like church
trip,
camp, where they go away. But man,
kind of makes you think twice. Back in the day, dude, you could send a kid through the U.S. Postal Service.
Oh yeah, my dad used to throw me in a taxi cab from Hollywood. Send me on a half-hour cab ride. Taxi cab.
What would you do in the cab for 30 minutes? Sit there?
Man, I guess just sit in the back seat and be happy to do.
You don't even remember that's how young you were?
I was young. Yeah, I was young. 7,
dude.
8. Yeah. 9.
No way, man.
10.
No way.
Those were the days.
No way. I guess.
Airport too. Picked up at the airport. Just take a cab.
I flew. My parents would fly me to my grandma's house a couple times, but they would be at the gate to watch me get on, and they would be at the gate to watch me get off.
Yeah, I flew several times.
Yeah, so I mean, in that instance, what are you going to do on a plane? It's not a whole lot.
Looking back at it, the dad throwing me in a taxi cab in Hollywood to get back down to the beach,
especially like in the 70s, dude. That's crazy. Anyway, if you don't have kids, if you ain't got time to have kids. So back to this case. They acquit this guy. He dies from a heart attack the same year he's acquitted, even though he was serving 305 years. In the late 80s, DNA testing comes up. The family goes and says, "Hey, let's test this again." At that point, it was a 1 in 7,000 chance that he was the man.
Pretty good odds.
Technology gets better. They go back in like 2017. They raise a bunch of money. And I guess in 2019, they basically said that this, based on the testing, was him. It had to have been him. But they didn't actually make that public until the family's victims said they wanted it made public this year, probably having something to do with the documentary that was made. But yeah, so I would hope got the closure that they needed in this case, but at the same time, you never know. I will say this, though. One of the fathers of the 3 victims went on to help state legislator pass the Oklahoma Victims Bill of Rights. He also helped found the Oklahoma Crime Victims Compensation Board. Another parent founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children, which is a support group to help get closure. So they, in that sense, did get some good out of it. But, again, it's one of those times where it's just like, golly, wrong place, wrong time. And how does evil like this in the world exist? Can't blame video games on this one.
Yeah.
But you could blame lead in the gasoline, which, by the way, starting to come back in the news a little bit, the lead poisoning stuff. So we might be having this conversation about more recent stuff coming up here. All in all, how many Thin Mint cookies would you give this documentary?
2.5 Thin Mint cookies. It was nothing special, but it was an interesting story.
I think Chenoweth's the idea that she could have been
that kind of
there was kind of interesting. I didn't really know a lot about the story, but again, DNA comes to the rescue like it always does. If you're listening to this at home, remember, if you think about killing someone, I don't know what you're going to do. Don't do it because they're going to catch you. DNA is a thing. So they're going to get you. There's not a whole lot you can do about that unless you have a lot of money. Then you can probably get away with anything.
Somebody's going to take that whole segment you just said and they're going to splice it up to where you're saying, if you're going to kill somebody and you got some money, Mike the Intern said he's murder for hire now.
Yeah, well, they got the whole thing on YouTube, which you can watch this thing every Thursday, 9 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook Live, or as a podcast on our 104.7 The Cave app. Jay, what are we watching next week?
We are going to watch... we're just going to stick on these gnarly topics, these dark subjects. John Wayne Gacy, Conversations with the Killer. Is that what it's called?
Yes, it's on Netflix.
Guy would dress away a clown and grab kids or whatever. Like, it does not sound good. Does not sound good.
If you're familiar about the clown killer, John Wayne Gacy, it's definitely not a fun ride, but it's a crazy, crazy story.
That's where we're going.
How this guy was able to get away with what he got away with for so long. At the same time of being in the public eye, he was a clown for hire. I think he was in like the Young Republic. He was definitely in like local government stuff. I mean, we'll get into it. Jay wants to keep going dirty. We're going to keep going dirty. I'm Mike the Intern. This is Jay Stevens reminding you, we watch movies so you don't have to. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave.